Throughout both Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2, Czerka are a considerable faction that has a major impact on a numerous amount of planets and storylines, and regardless of whether or not you choose to go down the light or dark side, they act as a constant thorn in your foot. Czerka is renowned for being one of the sleaziest and most nefarious companies within the Knights of the Old Republic universe, whose interests always end up being selfish. For example, in Knights of the Old Republic 1, they managed to weasel their way past Republic law to join in with the Wookiee slave trade. They also tried to have the Tusken Raiders on Tatooine butchered so that their business could flourish a little bit more smoothly. And then of course, when we move into Knights of the Old Republic 2, they're trying to completely destabilize the Trilogy restoration project so that their profits would be a little bit more profitable. Czerka as a company was all about any means necessary in the name of making a buck, and it was because of this that they attracted some of the most toxic and manipulative people to lead them. But of course, if you're watching this video, then I assume you have played the game, and we all know to some extent that Czerka, canonically in Knights of the Old Republic, failed at every attempt. Revan completely and utterly stops the Wookiee slave trade by helping the Wookiee uprising. He then negotiates with the Tusken Raiders on Tatooine to ensure a kind of peace. And then in Knights of the Old Republic 2, we out their sly business practices to the Tilosian officials. It always seems to end in failure for Czerka. So what exactly did this mean for them moving past the games? Did they continue to exploit multiple different planets, or did they simply kind of lose their grip on the galaxy? Now, when it comes to Czerka, we don't actually know too much about them historically. We know that they existed before the events of Knights of the Old Republic, and that they had actually been historically renowned for being an extremely immoral group, and they were actually founded as Czerka Mining and Industrial. So we can only assume that their initial purpose as a company was mining, but over time they branched out and they began to see the possibility of expanding their business. And so not only were they working on mining and industry, they started to enter the weapons market, and they started to provide food and commerce and much, much more. But like I said before, Czerka were all about money. They didn't care about people or who they affected or who they worked with. And in the build-up of the Jedi Civil War with Revan's Sith Empire and the Republic, Czerka felt that the Sith were the more profitable option. So they actually agreed an exclusive trade deal with the Empire, and they began to supply the Sith with weapons and armaments and food and whatever they needed to help continue their conquest. And then they even set up shop in the Dredge settlement on Korriban so that they could directly help support the growth of the Sith in the Academy. And additionally, for Czerka, the good thing about joining up with the Sith Empire is that they tended to look over their shadowy practices. Despite their public appearance as a normal company that just wanted to provide goods to the galaxy, Czerka had so many nefarious plots and intents. They were making bioweapons in secret, they were experimenting on animals and gene splicing, and they were doing terrible things so that they could get an edge on their competition. And one of the worst things that they engaged in, and that they even managed to find loopholes around in the legality system of the Republic, was actually the usage of slave labour. And oftentimes they did this with the idea that they were providing a service, which they actually called lifetime employment applications and contracts, aka slavery. But either way, now let's talk about the events after Knights of the Old Republic. So Czerka were forced off of Kashyyyk, as we know, and they were never able to go back to the planet or have any kind of hold over the Wookiees. But they did continue their slavery practices in any way that they could get away with legally. As for the Dredge settlement, it became worthless to them. The threat of civil war between the Sith on the planet was something that they weren't interested in, so they eventually just left them to fend for themselves. And because Czerka were the ones who actually supplied the Sith on Korriban, this only led to the further decline of those that were stuck on the planet. As for Tatooine, they did actually stay there. They brought in scientists and genetic experts who actually began to focus on dewbacks. What they intended to do was take the original dewback and breed them into something stronger. They wanted to essentially create war beasts. So they stayed on Tatooine, breeding this new, more aggressive version of a dewback, and they were initially successful. However, the facility that they had built to create them eventually kind of went haywire, and a herd of warbacks, let's call them, escaped from their enclosures, and they went on a devastating rampage through the facility, killing almost everyone and destroying much of their equipment. So Czerka decided, you know what, that's enough of that, so they stopped their warback project, and they left Tatooine entirely and basically wrote it off as a failure. With the Sith Empire gone, Czerka then tried to crawl their way into the pocket of the Republic. Now, despite initially being against them by working with the Sith Empire exclusively, the Republic actually kind of needed Czerka's support. Czerka was ridiculously rich, they had a monopoly on a variety of galactic commerce markets, and the Republic literally could not refuse their financial investments. So, Czerka made a deal with the Republic wherein which they would supply them with investment, and they would supply them with workers and money, and all they wanted in return was resources, and the right to any war materials left behind on Telos from the Jedi Civil War. They had also hoped that by getting into the Republic's good books that the Republic would hire them for any potential further restoration projects on other planets. But as I mentioned earlier, they were eventually outed to the officials of Telos as working with the Exchange to try and destabilize the Ithorians' work, and so Czerka was ordered to leave Telos, and it stood trial and they were accused of being guilty. So they were forced off of Telos entirely before the conclusion of Knights of the Old Republic 2 even took place. Now from here on, we don't actually hear much about Czerka, but to be fair, we don't really hear much about anything, and we get to the events of the Great Galactic War between the Sith Empire, again, and the Republic. Czerka, by this point in history, had grown exponentially, and it had become very well known for its military advancements and weapon advancements, and it actually became one of the biggest entities in the galaxy. Not only did Czerka own entire star systems, it employed billions of people and of course enslaved many too, and it actually had a place within the Republic's Senate. Despite only being a corporation, Czerka had a say in galactic politics. Their financial strength within the galactic community was something that almost everybody relied on, and the war that was happening between the Republic and the Sith got to the point where literally neither faction could actually refuse Czerka's financial investments and backing in almost every area. And this level of power gave Czerka so much leeway to do whatever the hell they wanted. Czerka was free to make trade deals with independent planets, and they even funded the Hutt cartel to some extent and had a trade agreement with them. If any of you guys have played Huttball from the Old Republic, they were a major sponsor of the event, and they even supplied the Hutts with many of the death traps and weapons that were used in the game, so things like acid pools, explosive traps and flame vents, some pretty diabolical stuff. And they also continued their sly attempts at getting an edge over their opponents in the biochemical field and the genetic engineering field. Czerka built a research facility on Duxon in which they were experimenting with local wildlife to try and create controllable war beasts again, but just like their original attempts on Tatooine, this kind of went wrong as the war beasts managed to break out and cause havoc. They also returned to Tatooine at some point, and they built a secret facility which they named their Secret Weapons Division 7, and their intent was to study ancient technology that was found on the planet. Czerka learned that there was something on Tatooine that they called the Type 7 weapon, which was capable of destroying entire planets, and so they did everything they could to get their hands on it first. What this Type 7 weapon ended up being was actually a Rakatan mind prison. The exact same one that we find in Knights of the Old Republic. This discovery from Czerka then leads to a whole planet questline where the imprisoned one within the mind prison tries to infect people to take over the planet with nanomachines. It's pretty cool, and it's all because of Czerka's greed that this actually happened. And then, of course, we have one of their more interesting business ventures they went down, and that was the production of assassination droids. The Sith Empire during the war had secretly ordered Czerka to create HK assassin droids that were based on the original models. And, of course, money is money, so Czerka did just that. They created the HK-51, and they made a huge batch of them and they sent them to the Sith. Luckily for the galaxy, the majority of the HK-51s were destroyed when the ship was hijacked and it crashed on Belsavis. However, things were eventually going to change. As I mentioned, Czerka were actually part of the Republic Senate, and they had become a giant entity. But the Republic had actually discovered many of their plots, and the Republic eventually snapped after they discovered an extremely secret facility on a moon in the unknown regions that Czerka were using to develop terrible things as per usual. The Republic decided that Czerka were no longer a company and Czerka were nationalized. Now, they didn't like this, so the leaders and the owners of Czerka Corporation disconnected from Czerka and managed to bypass Republic law again, finding loopholes, and they created a different company known as Czerka Interstellar, and by law the Republic couldn't do anything. Czerka Interstellar was a completely separate entity from Czerka, it just happened to share the same name, and so they started to continue exactly what they had been doing for the past hundreds of years. The Republic kind of eventually lost interest in Czerka's nefarious ways, and Czerka Interstellar eventually rebranded to Czerka Arms, and after the events of the Great Galactic War, they just kind of went back to normal. They started to manufacture weapons and military assets to whoever would buy them. And Czerka continued to do this, and they lasted all the way up until the events of the movies. And of course, they decided to sign an exclusivity deal with the Galactic Empire when the Republic fell, but even then they didn't actually uphold that exclusivity deal when they were selling their weapons to a variety of different people, so over the course of 3,000 years nothing had changed for Czerka. When the Galactic Empire fell, they then tried to sign another exclusivity deal, this time with the New Republic, and it was crazy to think that a company that had no loyalty and literally betrayed everyone at every turn managed to survive for that long. But saying that, I guess survival of the fittest kind of makes sense for these guys. Now, although Czerka didn't quite have the same level of monopoly that they did in the Old Republic era, instead focusing more on weapons and manufacturing as I said, by the time of the New Republic and the end of the expanded universe, Czerka was still considered to be one of the biggest and most profitable weapons manufacturers in the galaxy. So I guess for some, being bad does kind of pay off. I really enjoy making these kind of the fate of videos where I talk about the eventual fates of characters, factions, and species and whatnot from Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2. And if there's a specific thing within these games that you want to know the outcome of or the fate of, let me know down in the comment section below, because I might just make a video on it in the future. As always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit the like button because it tells YouTube that you had an absolutely smashing time and it helps me out a great deal. And if you haven't, perhaps consider subscribing to join the biggest growing Knights of the Old Republic community on YouTube. I'll see you guys in the next video. But until then, may the Force be with you. Always.